Hello, I'm Mike Huckabee. I'm sure you've heard the old saying, don't judge a book by its cover. Well, here's a true story that I heard recently that warmed my heart, and I think it illustrates the power of that motto. His name was Corey. He had dreadlocks down below his shoulders, which was kind of rare for a skinny white kid. He wore a t-shirt with a skull and crossbones on the front and holes in the sleeves. His jeans, old and tattered, and he would often walk barefoot. Corey's professors at his college near the beach in San Diego knew that he was a brilliant kid and kind of special but esoteric, yet very, very bright. He didn't speak much, pretty much kept to himself. At some point, his intellectual mind began a search for the real meaning of life. He was always a seeker of truth, not unlike those in my generation who were sometimes called hippies back in the 60s. Corey devoured the Bible, and as a result, he gave his life to the Lord. Then he heard from others, and he read in the Bible that he needed to attend a church. So one bright, sunny Sunday morning, he found one nearby, and he just showed up. Now, Corey had no idea that there were different flavors of churches. I mean, he didn't know what time the service started, and so he arrived with no shoes, ragged clothes, and hair that looked like, well, it had been transplanted on his head from the Caribbean, just as the sermon was about to start at the church. Now, since he had never been to a church before, he asked the usher if he needed the ticket to find a seat. That startled the usher, and he said, "Oh no, you can just sit anywhere." Then he watched nervously as Corey walked right down the center aisle. But the church was completely packed. So by now, people were staring, and yet nobody said anything. Corey kept walking, looking for an empty seat, getting closer and closer to the pulpit. Then, because his experience had been in crowded college classrooms or maybe at rock concerts, he just sat down on the carpet in the center of the aisle, right in front of the podium. Now, you can imagine, that had never happened before at this stoic church, and by now the atmosphere was thick with tension. Then the minister, standing frozen at the lectern, glanced down the aisle, and from way in the back of the church, his oldest elder was slowly, creakingly making his way toward him and Corey. Now, the elder was in his mid-80s, silver gray hair, beautiful three-piece suit, and a shiny cane, probably the most respected godly man in the very congregation. He was elegant and dignified, and pretty formal. It kind of took a long time for him to reach the boy. Of course, you can imagine the church was utterly silent except for the clicking of the old man's cane. All eyes were on him. You couldn't hear a breath. The minister's sermon notes were trembling in his hands. The congregation then heard a loud clack as the elder dropped his cane next to the newcomer. What was he going to do? Well, he gripped a pew, and slowly, painfully, he lowered himself to the carpet. Then he put his arm around the boy's shoulder and said, "Welcome." The minister blinked tears from his eyes. He could see others wiping their cheeks. After regaining control, he said, "What I'm about to preach, you'll never remember. But what you have just seen, you will never forget. Be careful how you live, because you may be the only Bible that some people will ever read." I say, let's go forth today and be the Bible that others will read. This is Mike Huckabee for Hope